Yeah, thank you, Simon, joining us today and be our speaker. Yeah, Simon currently working as professor in University of Texas. And yeah, so he will introduce and he will share with us a lot of cool production kind of experience teaching in related to teaching. Yeah, so yeah, that's welcome, Simon, and I will pass the baton to Simon. Yeah.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm going to start really quick. Well, let me share my screen first and start a presentation. And then really quick, I'm going to just introduce myself and kind of talk about like what I was trying to do with this presentation and all that. So my name is Simon Quiroz. I've been teaching at the University of Texas for quite a while now, pretty much since I was a grad student. I was also part of the UT3 program that started around 2013, 2014. The idea with that UT3 program was to train student filmmakers into the creative process of stereoscopic filmmaking, what it takes, not only in technical stuff, but also creative stuff and how to make decisions. That was a good program because it allows us to do a lot of experimentation and then also take some of the things that we know as cinematography for a very long time, apply that into the stereoscopic medium, see what worked, see what didn't work, and then come up and learn from people who had done it before, but define some of the language of stereoscopic filmmaking. Towards 2016, as there was more hype about VR, and at that point, if I remember correctly, there was more of like 360 video coming up. We started doing a lot of that, a lot of 360 video, hoping that we will be able to do 360 stereoscopic video pretty soon. And anyways, we devised our own camera using the micro black magics, and it was able to do stereoscopic, but only in the front, without getting into too much detail because of the complexities that putting big cameras in a circle percent when doing a stereoscopic. But later on, anyways, so as I was talking to Jim, the program dissolved around 2018 or so. I was there. I was teaching a class mostly to do with color grading. But also one of the other things that I was teaching was a class called Immersive Filmmaking that later on came to be called Directing for VR. And so here are some of the things that I've learned through that process and some ideas. And what I'm going to talk about is mostly like probably stuff that is already redundant to some of you guys. But it does provide some basis for what I really want to talk about, which is content creation, and think volumetrically about content creation and what I refer to as volumetric storytelling, which is mostly a combination of ideas and things that I've seen that worked taken from stereoscopic cinema, applying to VR and adapting those to how can we tell stories in VR, but also in AR, and also why not expand to like even, you know, Internet of Things, and how can we combine stories that exist in a virtual world with the real world, things like that. So what I'm trying to say is I'm going to make a lot of emphasis on this idea of spatial composition, spatial storytelling, but it's mostly a combination of ideas, what I'm going to say, and things that may be a little redundant when talking about the technologies, but hopefully at the end of this conversation, we could all agree that the way to go with these kind of mediums is to think spatially, right? To think volumetrically. And then I'll make my point a little bit stronger when I talk why I think that's very, very important. So yeah, as of this semester, I'm not going to be teaching at UT anymore because I'm actually going to be moving to Los Angeles or nearby Los Angeles. I haven't decided yet. Because I'm going to be starting teaching the program at Cal State Channel Islands, and some of these things that I'm going to talk about is some of the ideas that hopefully I can incorporate into that program and train some students with these ideas in mind. So Having said that, that's me, that's Simon, and the title of this presentation is Metaverse Wondering, because I'm wondering, what is this Metaverse hyped? What is this Metaverse talk about? What is it like that people are so excited about? To me, it's exciting, but I'm also approaching it from a point of skepticism. Skepticism because, in a way, what I'm seeing is a lot of the things that I saw with the stereoscopic filmmaking is that there's a lot of really good content with 3D films. Some content that you won't be able to appreciate unless you see it the way that the creators intended it to. But at the same time, early on, and even towards an extent of like later with Hollywood tried to take it over, some of the stuff didn't work, right? And people became bitter about it. Audiences didn't like it. And it's like, why do you like 3D? Well, it gives me a headache. Well, I don't see the point. It was like, well, yeah, because Hollywood was making 3D for the sake of making money, not for the sake of telling a story or using tools to tell a story or to create an emotional impact. Early on at the beginning of 3D, there is a movie called Coming at You, right? Where all they did was throwing stuff towards the screen. Of course, they're gonna give people headaches, right? They're messing with people's brain, messing with people's eyes rotation, all those things. So hopefully with these, thinking about what we want to do, how this medium can help us to tell a story, will help future storytellers, or even ourselves, or even myself as a content creator, to create stories that are impactful, immersive, and emotional, that satisfy the idea of presence and embodiment, all in what we refer to as the metaverse, or how we want to see the metaverse. So this conversation is more of a suggestion of what I think the metaverse could benefit from. So what is the metaverse? And if you Google it, if you try to read about it, if you go to conversations, nobody seems to really have a real clear definition of it. Some people just call it the future of the internet, a 3D version of the internet, a parallel place of the physical world, a virtual space, or a digital space. Some people have gone to the extent to say that the metaverse is going to replace cinema as we know it. And I don't know about that. I'm very, very skeptical about all those things. Because everybody seems to have a different definition that accommodates based on what they're trying to do, right? So I'm not entirely sure. However, what seems to be common here is that all these definitions, they try to focus on space and spatial ideas, right? The 3D version of the internet. What does that mean? Well, does that mean that I need to, when I explore the internet, things are going to come out of the screen and I'm going to experience things volumetrically? Does that mean that, as in the case of augmented reality, of where it stands right now, I'm going to see a render of a three-dimensional object in the real world? But even though that's not necessarily 3D or stereoscopic, because I'm still rendering that 3D object in a two-dimensional screen. So having all these questions, I think that that at very least what we can agree on is space. And what does that mean? Well, before I talk about spatial composition, I would like to talk about the technology, because that seems to be also where the focus is. Like I was talking to Dominic early on before I started the conversation, and we were talking about the Augmented Reality World Expo that was like about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And as I was going through the expo, I noticed that most companies were really focusing on technology, right? There's a lot of cool tech, especially with haptics. I think that's one of the things that I saw the most. But there was not a lot of content. I think the content is the part that we're still lacking. So talking about the technology, here is what I have, right? Here's what I think, or not what I think, what other people have said needs to be used in order to build the metaverse, right? Because as we know, the metaverse is just an idea with different definitions depending on different people. But there's nothing, at least in my experience, that I can say, hey, this is what the metaverse is. This is how you access it. This is exactly what you do, right? So when it comes to technology, we have Internet of Things, right? A Nest device, um, things that have to do with physical computing, sensors, things like that, things that can exist in the real world and can do things for us. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, all that kind of stuff. Blockchain and Web3. Basically, my understanding is that Web3 is information that exists based on the blockchain, but also incorporates three-dimensionality, right? Assets that are three-dimensional, NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Anyways, we could talk about any of these technologies at an extent, but I'm just going to list them just so we have a context of where I'm going with this. Internet, 5G, obviously haptics, and then the convergence of XR technologies, AR, VR, MR, mixed reality, and spatial computing, right? So all these technologies are what are supposed to build the infrastructure for the metaverse. And here are some of the layers. So experience, discovery, creator economy, spatial computing, decentralization, human interface, and infrastructure. So when we're talking about to experience and content, that's what excites me the most, right? Games, social events, esports, shopping, live theater, cinema, any kind of experience, right? Discovery refers to the idea of advertisement networks, right? Social curation, ratings, agents, and how can these networks kind of like bring like translate from the hype of the metaverse to actually convert that into users, right? Into users that would like to spend a lot of time in what we refer as the metaverse, right? Then we have the creator economy, which includes design tools, asset markets, right? Workflow, commerce. So design tools, we have Unity, Unreal, the game engines, 360 cameras. If you're talking about just video, like editing software that ideally will support stereoscopic creation. Asset markets such as TurboSquid, CG Trader, things like that. The next thing is spatial computing, back to the 3D engines, but also hardware, right? AR, VR, XR. So what does that mean? Does that mean that if I want to access the metaverse, do I need one of these? My opinion is yes. If we wanna do a spatial composition and experience a spatial and space, we do need a mechanism for us to experience the world in a three-dimensional environment. Some other people argue that that's not the case. You can use your phone, or such as in the case of augmented reality as it stands right now, and you can play Roblox, you can play a game, and create all the things that involve the metaverse without necessarily needing a device such an Oculus headset or things like that. But that's up for debate, right? So the next thing is decentralization. We have things such as edge computing, obviously blockchain, artificial intelligence. And then the last thing, I misspelled that word, is supposed to say human interface. Oh no, I spelled it right. It's human interface. If we want to talk about interface, we probably shouldn't just copy and paste what we already have, right? Because it's a different medium, so we need to compose for that medium. The idea that we need our space to become our interface. So the interface is our surroundings, right? The interface is our world, the world around us, the world that we can inhabit. That also should probably include haptics, voice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we need infrastructure, right? How are we going to leverage all these three-dimensional renderings or high-resolution video, especially in the stereoscopic, or download of 3D assets if we don't have fast internet, right? So 5G will, and mobile internet. So 5G will play a role here. But also, in terms of just infrastructure alone, we probably need a lot of good computing hardware, right? Mostly like strong GPUs that can be leveraged with the devices. Like the Oculus Quest 2 is pretty good, but there are times where, like, if you're designing, you have to still control your assets and kind of lower the resolution, lower number of polygons, things like that. as we are now. So the next thing is, how do we access it? Well, what is our audience, right? So how do we leverage this audience, right? So as for now, AR headsets, right? We have Magic Leap, HoloLens, things like that. VR headsets, such as Oculus Quest 2, Vive, etc. Phones or tablets, desktop computers, wearables. And like I said, some people do argue that in order to access this whole idea of the metaverse, we don't really need headsets. I think that is possible. I don't think that will give us the full experience of what we can create with content, right? So as you can see, most of the talks, at least what I've seen, most of the stuff that is being made right now, it's pretty much focusing on the technology, right? And that's great, because for me, as a content creator, that just gives me ideas. Ooh, what can I do with this kind of technology? What can I do to tell a story that hasn't even been told before and still affect my audiences emotionally, but in a way that cannot be done through a film, right? Or through a book or anything like that. So that's good. The technology is great. It gives me ideas, but we do need to understand this technology. So here's the thing, what I think will make the metaverse go mainstream is to focus on content rather than the technology, right? There needs to be a strong content that audiences want to spend their time watching, experiencing, or consuming in order for a metaverse to really be take over, right? Otherwise, the technology alone, as we've learned from 3D filmmaking, is not sustainable, right? So we also need to engage our audiences emotionally. Also, there's a lot of applications that are not just entertainment. And what I'm describing right now, it's a lot of entertainment, such as other audiences, other applications such as health, education, training, things like that. But even that should probably still rely on a strong content and somehow engage audiences emotionally. And then replication of content from other mediums. Can we really do that? And my answer to that is no. Because if we're just gonna go ahead and copy and paste something that has done really good in another medium, and then just adapt it one-on-one to this new metaverse idea and this medium, I don't think then why? Then what's the point, right? And also because when we're designing for spatial, for space, for experiences to be enjoyed in a space, we don't really rely on the same language, on the same tools that we rely, say, on other mediums such as film or theater, etc., like that. We can borrow ideas from there, but doesn't mean that we can adapt them one-on-one, because it probably is not going to work. And I'll expand on this in a little bit more, a little bit later. Okay, so the next thing is when designing content is think volumetrically. What does that mean? Well, what that means is that we're not used to thinking volumetrically as content creators. I know from from my students, for example, and from being in film school for a while, is that as filmmakers, we're trying to think about how can we translate a world that is three-dimensionality and put it on a flat screen. And there's different techniques of that, right? The lenses that we use, the lighting, and all the stuff. And that's great because we're still, trying to represent a three-dimensional world in a two-dimensional screen. But in this scenario, we're actually dealing with real space, right? So things such as that work in a 2D cinema or traditional cinema, such as editing, for example, is not going to work for virtual reality, for augmented reality, right? Because we're not thinking volumetrically. Another scenario is, for example, in a film, and as a film director, if I want my audience to notice something, well, I cut to a close-up, right? That whole idea of close-up needs to be reframed in this medium. In stereoscopic filmmaking, we could get away with that close-up, but that's when we start learning. It's like, what would I want to do a close-up when the audiences can actually see and experience the space as if they were actually there, right? This whole idea of presence. So instead of a close-up, maybe we redo our blocking with our actors, so we get the same idea without having to rely on those mechanics that that work very well for 2D cinema, but may not work the same way that we want them to work in these kind of mediums, right? Especially when thinking about volumetric filmmaking. So think volumetrically is just, it goes beyond just thinking, oh, okay, well, I just placed an object behind another object. It's a little bit more complex than that. I'll try to talk more about this in a little bit later, but thinking volumetrically has to do more with thinking about the space and how we position things within the space and how we position our audiences in relationship to those spaces, right? Giving them also the freedom to experience the space without overwhelming. In other words, we suggest a strong points of view. We don't necessarily dictate that point of view. Focus on immersion, right? So back to this idea, well, if we can situate an audience or a user in a certain place, and they can accept that place as their first point of contact, and then experience that place volumetrically, I think that's one step to think about immersion, right? The more immersive it is, probably the more emotional I'm gonna get, and if it's a good story, probably the more I will want to consume experiences in these mediums. So anyways, so all this to say that focusing content and leveraging technology is important, right? So it almost sounds like a contradiction, right? And I'm not trying to say that technology is not important, because it is. But we need to create the content that makes good use of this technology in a way that is not just exploiting the technology. For example, back what I was saying in that movie Coming at You in 3D, where like the whole movie, there was every scene, they were always throwing something at the audience, right? It's like, look what 3D can do. Let me show you, right? In this case, the same thing. There's a lot of opportunities to do things, especially when it comes to interactivity, when it comes to three-dimensionality, but we have to be thinking about those in a way that those things serve our story, not in a way that the story needs to serve the technology. And at the end of the day, we all want a good story, right? So if somebody such as myself or anybody that wants to tell a story with this medium, I think the first thing that we should ask ourselves is why. What is it about this medium that we cannot achieve in other mediums? Well, in my opinion, there's a lot of things that we can do, right? This idea of presence, this idea of embodiment, this idea to teleport me in a place that I will probably have a really hard time if I was going to travel to such place, right? Or maybe impossible, maybe dangerous to go to that place. Well, with this medium, I could place a story and I could transport my audiences to those places and give them that feeling, and then give them that feeling of what that space can do for them, right? If I can treat that space as a character. So that could be one of those things, right? This medium can, in fact, give us an opportunity to tell stories, to immerse our audiences in places that we wouldn't otherwise be able to with other traditional mediums, right? And then how can we also create experiences that are not just games, right? Like, you know, when I talk to somebody who is not in the medium, who has never really heard about the word metaverse and all stuff, and I mentioned for the first time the metaverse, the first thing that they think about is, oh, okay, it's just games, right? So I can just play a game. It's like, well, part of it is, but there's other opportunities there that haven't been necessarily exploited that go beyond games, right? As a filmmaker, you know, there's stories that are out there that are pretty good. A lot of them are bad, but a lot of them are pretty good. Like most of the stuff that Felix and Paul produces are pretty good, right? But also, I think we can still push this idea further of transporting people into virtual spaces, augmented reality places, but also physical spaces, right? How can we interact in stories that exist in a virtual world, but also translate that to the physical world? And what can technology do for us as creators that another medium can do? Here's an example, and this may sound premature, but when I was at the Augmented Reality World Expo a couple of weeks ago, I went to a booth of a company. What they're doing is they're doing haptics. And they do have this device where like you put it on your hands, and if you touch something that is supposed to be hot, it feels hot. And then if you touch something that is to be cold, it just feels cold. That's the technology, right? It's pretty cool. I thought it was pretty awesome. I was into it. But after that, what happens? And it was like, well, I can tell is that it's pretty cool. It didn't do anything for me other than that. As a creator, if I can think of like, okay, what can I do if I can come up with a story, and then with like a directed scenario where like my audiences can experience some of that, some of those haptics within that story, I think that could translate to something where we can actually make an emotional connection. And that's in the scenario where no other medium could give me that experience. And if I can share that with my audiences, I think I could say something, maybe propel some change, maybe propel some idea, convince them emotionally to take some sort of action, right? Which is what we want to do as storytellers, right? We don't just want to tell a story for the sake of telling a story. We want to create some sort of impact in our audiences. And if that impact can be stronger with good use of the tools, then I think this is a great opportunity, right? This is the part that excites me. And also, here's the other thing, when it comes to creation and technology, we need to understand the technology to really hone our intentions, right? What I'm trying to say is you have, for example, filmmakers that come from a 2D background. They're very good at it. And they want to come in and create experiences for space, for the medium. The things that they know how to do really well on the 2D, they're not going to apply, right? So part of the work is to see what the technology can do, so I can actually craft a story that actually makes good use of the technology, right? So I don't just exploit the technology for the sake of exploiting the technology, but also so I don't just miss an opportunity of what the technology can do by trying to copy and paste what other medias have already done and have done really well. And last is, can we affect our audiences emotionally with this medium? And if the answer is yes, then I think, yeah, we're in good track. So back to this idea of thinking spatially. So we're used to making compositions in X, Y dimensions, right? If I'm making a film, I'm trying to translate the three-dimensional world into an X and Y composition, right? I'm thinking of like, okay, well, my subject's head should be, at the points of power, right? Or it should be like a little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, but that's how I'm thinking of. Well, with this medium, we have to really, really work to think spatially, right? So instead of thinking of just X and Y compositions, we should also be thinking about X, Y, and Z compositions. It sounds easy, right? I just go and be like, okay, well, instead of just thinking up, down, left, and right, I also think front and back. Well, yeah, except that there is more than just thinking front and back when it comes to three-dimensional compositions, right? Because I'm thinking front and back, then my first instinct is to think of as a subject of an actor moving from front and back, left and right, up and down. But that's not thinking spatially. That's just moving an actor through space. Thinking spatially means that we're actually thinking intentionally from the moment of we're crafting a story or a composition of what this space is doing for us, right? That's one. And if I want to have that space some sort of dimensionality, a white screen in the background is not going to do it, right? I probably need to give it texture. I probably need to do some production design, right? To make things inhabit this space, right? Maybe I need to think of foreground, middle ground, background. And then also if I'm doing 360, then what's on the back, what's on the left, what's on the right? And also, where do I situate my point of view, my audience in the first space, in this three-dimensional space, in that sphere, or however you want to look at it. But ideally, I'm not just walking in a blank space, but rather in a space that is filled with depth cues, right? things that give me a reference of where objects are situated in relationship with other objects. And if I can do that, I think I can create a richer world. I can also create a world that is more immersive. And also, I'm thinking about volumetrically. Speaking of volumetrically, another thing to consider is if I want to create some sort of empathy, probably an actor that is far away may not do their job for me, right? We know for a fact that we have binocular vision, but actually we only see binocular, like 3 dimensions in stuff that is right near to us. Past 30, 40 feet, we actually don't see 3 dimensions. We think we do because we have depth cues that allows us to understand the world in 3 dimensions. But when it actually comes with binocular vision, we only see binocular visions about 30 feet or so, right? So thinking about that, then I can use economics to tell my story still in the volumetric space. But also, part of what creates empathy in audiences is reactions, right? If I see somebody cry, you know, I'm going to feel some sort of empathy. If I see somebody do like micro movement with their faces, right? The spatial language, body language, all that stuff. So I can use this volumetric idea to even enhance that, right? So it's different when I see somebody's faces in a flat screen over Zoom versus when I'm in front of them, and then I can see the 3-dimensionality of somebody's face, the roundness, right? That's stuff that I don't consciously think about it, but subconsciously I'm making decisions, judgments about this other person based on those little things. And those are the things that, if I'm thinking volumetrically when creating a story, when creating content, I can actually emotionally affect my audience, right? Lighting plays a big factor in this scenario. So anyways, like I said, the space around us play a big factor. We have to think about the space when it comes to composition, not just as a space that exists in a space, but a 3-dimensional space that benefits by creating depth cues, by adding production design, and by thinking how the subject is going to move around the space. And also, what's the relationship between the subject or subjects with the audience or the user, right? And how the user is placed and how the user is going to also potentially move around this space and what kind of encounters he or she or they are going to have. So anyways, this is the part that I think is very, very important. Make use of Stereoscopic when thinking about content creation. So what is Absteropsis? Absteropsis is defined as the idea that we are capable of seeing 3 dimensions, right? Binocular vision, pretty much. Most people have Absteropsis, some people don't, but most people do. And what I mean is back to the idea that I was saying when some people claim that the metaverse can only be accessed through cell phone, or can potentially just also be accessed through cell phones. To me, that's missing the full experience, right? To me, the full experience is to understand this world, to see this world the way we see our physical world, right? If we really want to go there, then we have to take full advantage of what the different devices can offer, right? So yeah, so thinking about Stereoscopic is also a good idea, right? But also when it comes to that, then we gotta be careful because, you know, Stereoscopic in a headset, for example, it's an optical illusion. That means that we see the left image, the right image at a different angle. Our brain interprets that as depth, and then we make our brain makes the relationships based on that, right? So because of that, there's a potential to create problems. So in the moment of thinking spatially, we have to be thinking about what those problems could be and how can we give our audiences a seamless, natural experience that is not going to create some potential physical problems later. And we can talk about a lot about that, but that'll probably be a lot more talks. So anyways, so then the other thing about thinking spatially is that we don't only need to focus just on the visuals, right? We can also think about sound, right? Spatial sound. And what can sound do for us to tell stories, right? If I can hear something on the background or foreground, then those are going to give me cues to maybe direct my user's attention, right? Or if I see some sound that is going from far away, maybe I want to get closer to that or walk closer to it. And then the other thing, why not think about also the infrastructure as a spatial, right? The internet. This whole idea that I could leverage Internet of Things to think about relationships that I can do in a virtual space or a digital generated space with scenarios that that can exist in an actual physical environment, right? And then also, in order to think about especially the social aspect of it, right? And that's when we can start getting into things about like what is like personal space versus shared space, things like that. You know, when we have avatars sharing the same experience or whatever, you know, how the relationship between these two avatars enhance or challenge each other, and then we can talk about ethics and all that stuff. So, okay, so I'm just gonna give a quick example here of what this spatial thinking is in a very simple scenario that may not be translatable from traditional filmmaking into this space right away. When I was working for Light Planet, part of what I did at Light Planet is a company that they were trying to do a 360 stereoscopic camera that will stitch on board. And anyways, I was brought on board to help their post-production team and also give my recommendations about the camera and ideas for best capture in stereoscopic media. But here's my example. My example is that when I joined the team, they didn't they hired some editors that are really good editors in a 2D space. But one of the first things that I noticed that wasn't working was that the experiences that they were creating, because the camera is stereoscopic, and most of them was music. So when we will put on the headset, it was fine, right? There were some problems that the stitching of camera will do, but other than that, it was fine. But part of what they wanted to do, they wanted to put titles, right? And there was a title on the experience, and the title was supposed to be show up in below the artist or something like that. But when you look at that title, there was something really strange that will be hurting your eyes. And then anyway, so I knew what it was, and basically what it is that when you're thinking about volumetrically, when you're thinking about space, we're in the real world. If I'm looking at something, and then I'm looking at something behind it, and I know that something is behind it is behind what I'm looking at, because I have depth cues, right? Size, what's called stability, things like shadow and light, things like that. But one of the things that I understand that when an object is behind another object is occlusion, right? So in 3D, when I put up the headset, you achieve depth of an image in stereoscopic imaging by separating those images, right? And depending how far you separate them is where you put them on space. So what these editors were doing, they were putting the titles at a certain depth, but that was in fact behind the subject. So when I look at it, my brain thinks it's like, okay, well, I'm not seeing any occlusion, I'm seeing the whole text, but that text is in the wrong depth. Therefore, I'm getting confused. It's giving me a headache. My eyes hurt. So it was easy. What I told them is like, every time you guys have to put titles, make sure that you watch it in space. You can actually put the titles at the right depth, because if you don't, that's one of the first things that is going to make your audiences take off the glasses, take off the headsets, and then we lose audiences, right? Because to get them back is going to be extremely hard. If you don't give that audience a great experience the very first time, we're going to lose them, right? For us, we care about the technology. We're excited about it. We're excited about the things that we can do. But for most people, the average user, they don't care. They either get a good experience or they don't. If they get a good experience, they want to do it again. If they don't, they may be a little more reluctant the next time. Okay. So one of the things that as a storyteller, I like to have, and I'm sure everybody who likes to tell stories is will agree on this, is that we want to have control, right? And that's one of the first things that when we're thinking especially, we kind of have to let go some of it, right? In a 2D medium, if I'm composing an image, I know where my audience is going to look. I know where they're going to look first, and I want to control that, whether it's through composition or through editing, etc. In an XR medium, we can only offer strong points of view. We cannot necessarily dictate where our audiences are going to be looking at every single point, right? So one of the things we should probably do is put ourselves in the audience's shoes and understand what the emotional, physical, and cognitive experience based on that strong point of view. I can create an experience where, like, you know, where the point of attention is where I want them to look, and then that doesn't mean that they're always going to be looking in that direction. One of the things that we learned with 360 video is that to put stuff all over 360 is not necessarily the best approach, right? Because it's a little bit overwhelming, and especially when wearing a headset, you don't want audiences to be, you know, being a contortionist after 10 minutes or whatever. So whereas we lose a little bit of control, we still want to offer strong points of view, strong tension points, things like that. And we also need to understand that this idea of storytelling in the metaverse, or for virtual reality, augmented reality, we need to understand that audiences have a strong immersion, presence, this idea of presence, this idea of embodiment, right? And how can we also leverage interactivity, right? Is the audience's a participatory element on what the story happens, and how is that not a game? Or can we allow them to just observe and participate at given moments? And how can we leverage other things, such as what I was describing with haptics, and give them a strong experience of being there, being present, right? One of the things that I like to suggest to my students is that interactivity doesn't have to be a game, right? Because if you do that, then you're doing a game, right? If you do this, then you go to C or branch narratives. When you're creating an experience, interactivity can be something as subtle as just like, hey, look at this part right here, or share your experience with somebody, or in the case of like haptics, right, like at certain specific points of the story, then give your audiences a touch or something, right, something that reflects what you're trying to say. But again, without exploiting just technology just for exploiting the technology, but rather using the technology to enhance what you're trying to say as a storyteller. And also the other scenario, there's two scenarios here when it comes to interactivity. You can either let your user find the story, or you can serve the story, right? And those are two different trains of thought, two different approaches. Nothing is, I don't mind either one. I think every story deserves a different approach depending what the content is. But the one thing that ideally we would be doing here is to create satisfying narratives, right? At the end of the day, it could be an experience, but if I can create a satisfying narrative and I can emotionally affect my audience, then I think I've done a good job. Anyways, so because of the strong sense of presence that our audiences have in the creation of this, and also how we actually create experiences or try to build experiences, we cannot forget the whole idea about identity, right? One of the things with the metaverse is that it was going to allow people to define a virtual identity that is going to be different than everybody else's. It's kind of like in the real world, right? So we should factor this idea of identity when building experiences. What is our audience? Who's our audience to begin with? And how can we tailor these experiences to give to the audiences that will satisfy their identity, but also help them build their identity further, right? In order for this to actually be done properly, I think there needs to be a very full and trusted identity, right? So people cannot just like copy somebody else's identity and then, you know, pretend they're somebody else, because that could create some problems, etc. But also for as creators, if I can understand my audience's identity, then I can understand what I can do better, what they like, right? And accommodate my content based on that, and accommodate my voice based on that. Identity is usually represented by avatars. And part of this avatar situation is that, I don't know if you guys have experience, I'm sure you guys have experienced a lot of experiences in VR or AR, is that there's like a lot of different ways to create an identity based on different app that you're using, right? If you have experience or play with the with Oculus Quest in Unity, and you play with Oculus avatars, I think the new version is 2.0, the SDK 2.0. That's one way to look at it. But if you go to big screen, for example, then they have their own way of doing their avatars and identity. So there's discrepancies right there, right? So if we can actually create an interoperability and then define this identity on different applications, I think that'll be a good thing. However, then there goes the question, who actually owns these identities and who governs the verifiable and trusted identity, right? If you ask Meta, then they'll tell you they'll do it, right? However, this is where blockchain could come into place, right? So it's nothing decentralized, but could be decentralized, giving the user more agency on their own identities and their own data. So this could be done with privacy by design. Now, for me, this is just suggestion, right? At the end of the day, I'm not the one who's actually going to build this. I'm the one that hopefully is going to use these to create content or provide a scenario for future filmmakers, future storytellers, future content creators, some idea of the tools available so they can create these new stories, things like that. All right. So also, when it comes to that, when it comes to identity, we have these scenarios of spaces, right? And we're talking about the idea that the space plays a role. This place, if we can use space as a character, then what about experiences that happen in a shared space, and who owns this space, right? Digital property, right? Now, who owns it, and what are the rules associated with these spaces? What can users do or not do? And then how the information that is presented as an identity can actually be leveraged for a certain space. And how do we build experiences for shared spaces and define the rules of it? Now, I'm not sure about this necessarily, like how or where it's going to go. I can just think of ideas as a storyteller, as a content creator of, oh, okay, well, what if this experience only happens in this given space? And that's it, right? Nobody else can recreate it because it can only happen on this given space. And everybody who wants to experience this can come to this specific space. And what I'm going to say is an example of an idea that a friend of mine was telling me that works for Meta. When I am skeptical about NFTs, right? And I was telling my friend about my skepticism about NFTs. His perspective was like, well, that's because it's too early on that idea, right? But what if like we can create experiences where like people can own digital property or digital assets that can only be able to render on a specific space. So that way you can verify that the identity of that person is who they say they are based on their digital property. I'm still skeptical about it, but it's an idea. And if I want to think about storytelling and content, I should probably consider, right? And maybe do more research and then see how I can leverage this idea, this tool potential to tell a story. Right? I don't know. I may not be the one that may come up with the greatest idea, but maybe somebody younger will, and they will use it, and then they will actually make me not so skeptical about it. Right? I'll be like, okay, digital property. This is it. At the end of the day, what I'm looking for is how can we use all these for strong content and to create an emotional impact. The next thing is interfaces. So when it comes to the metaverse, we're used to the two-dimensional space, right? We look at our phones, we're situated in our phones, we have our gestures to interact with information, etc. But in this idea of the metaverse, it should probably shift our attention from the screen to the world around us, right? How can we potentially place information in the world around us and interact with it in a way that is as satisfactory as how we interact with mediums in the 2D world? We can do it also through speech, thought, gestures, and I think good design, it's imperative here, right? building with space and depth in mind, right? That's the whole idea of spatiability, thinking spatially. It's paramount here. Okay, so immersive content and getting past the hype, right? As of it sounds now with the metaverse, it seems that there's a lot of hype. It seems that there's a lot of speculation, but nobody seems to really tell me exactly what to do, right? If you look at other mediums, the internet, we know what the internet can do. Filmmaking, right? We understand the film right away, right? Theater, we know what to expect, how to behave, how to interact with theater. And then with the metaverse, it's still a blank canvas, right? We're still trying to define it. And as we stand right now, I think there's a lot of hype. I think to get past that hype, if we can focus on strong immersive content, it was a good idea. Not necessarily the technology will help us, but we shouldn't just focus on the technology alone. As we learn from 3D films, focusing on technology alone, audiences will get tired of it, right? But if there's content and content that I can only experience in this place, that is going to emotionally satisfy me or my audiences, I think that's the way to go. Make a strong use of space, create memorable, positive emotional experiences to get audiences to adopt metaverse, right? Think volumetrically. And obviously understand the technology, and all that will help drive user participation. There's this idea that what's called the McAfee law, that the value of a network is derived from the amount of users that it has. Same thing here, right? The value of the metaverse is going to be derived by user adoption and participation, right? Not just people who like working on these or who are fascinated by the technology, such as myself, probably yourselves, but just the average user. What kind of content can they experience that they're not going to be able to experience anywhere else? If we can get there, and then I think then that's the way to go. Opportunities. Well, this is the exciting part for me. New storytellers, new voices, right? As a content creator, it's hard to create content and put it in the mainstream without getting distribution or without going through all these mechanics, infrastructures that are already in place that leave a lot of people out. And we probably as audiences will never get to experience different kind of content because of the mechanics that is in place that control distribution. Well, here, it's an opportunity for new storytellers, new voices, right? To tell stories that can only be experienced here, but also something that seems fresh. There's a room for experimentation and stories that can happen in a real space, right? Audiences that can interact with characters in the same space. And the audience is part of that idea of presence, immersion, and embodiment, and the relationship between the audiences, creators, and the direct feedback that the creators can get by their audiences potentially in real time, right? So that's the part that excites me. And with that, we also have the creator economy and the immersive experience economy, right? Where we can actually, as creators, monetize if we can create experiences where the audiences are willing to spend time in your spaces, right? Because you're actually getting the users a feeling that they're not going to get anywhere else. All this stuff, spending time in a certain space in the metaverse, and the premium or the value that audiences can get from there, I think it's a good opportunity to create an economy of experiences, an economy of watching. What are some of the challenges with this? Well, designs and experiences not factoring the limitations of hardware. Like this Oculus Quest, right? I think if I wear it for like 15 minutes, it's pretty awesome. But for me, after past 15 minutes, starts getting a little bit weird, because especially here in Texas where it's hot. Put on the thing, starts getting foggy, right? And in terms of depth perception, if the lenses get foggy, well, what they're creating is they're creating a different image from the left and the right. This is called retinal rivalry, where I see slightly different, something that is different on the two images. And that's affecting me how I perceive depth. So with that, then, I'm tend to be like, okay, this is pretty cool, but I'm gonna take it out, right? So with that in mind, as we stand now, well, maybe we should limit our experiences to shorter periods of time. When the technology gets better, maybe that's going to help us, tell longer stories and actually get audiences to wear these more often for longer periods of time. As for now, I don't think that's the case. It's also pretty heavy, and also, like, what if I'm wearing it and want to scratch my nose or something? It's just pretty weird. So when it comes to hardware, maybe hardware manufacturers should probably factor that in. Once things gets better, then I think it also will be better for content creators. Lack of computing power and resources. This is pretty cool, but the graphics are not that great, and it has to do with computing power, right? Once we actually can get more computer power and maybe render more real life experiences, I think that can be pretty great. Nausea and vomiting, getting DC, all those things that come with like bad content, right? If I'm shaking the camera or shaking in a 360 video, for example, shaking the camera too much and watching it messes up with my stabilization, and it can create nausea and vomiting. So we have to factor it in. Sweat is what I was saying. The device can get pretty sweaty, can cause discomfort and retinal rivalry, and then disorientation, right? So as a creator, I need to factor it. Like, if I want my audiences to move around the space, what kind of, how can I make the experience better, right? How can I make the experience more comfortable? Or discomfort, if that's what I want to create, but it needs to be intentional. Then a couple last things, and then I'll stop here. Actually, I'm going to show a video of one of the things that we did at University of Texas with an augmented reality project, and I'll stop right there. Data is another thing that is interesting here, where we have the ability to gather users data to enable more tailored experience, right? If I can own that data as a creator, then I'll be able to understand where my audiences are going, and then I can be able to sustain future projects, make them better with a direct feedback. That also comes a matter of ethics, with who owns the data and all that stuff. But last but not least, content is king, but needs to be done right, understanding the technology. We cannot just copy and paste other mediums into it, because there are things that work great for that medium doesn't mean that's going to work for this new medium, for the metaverse. Spatial compositions play a big factor in the design. Stories play a big factor. We definitely need to understand what technology can do to make these stories better. And technology alone will not make the metaverse succeed in its content, strong content, right? Content creators need to play a bigger role in this. And we need to leverage the technology of the metaverse in a way that makes sense for the content and the stories being built around it. And also, I think a step further is to not just limit to the experience to a single device, but also make use of everything that the whole idea of the metaverse has to offer, right? Internet of Things, the phones, access, all this stuff. And then with that, then hopefully we can go past beyond the speculation of what the metaverse can do, and maybe define it in a way that our audiences will understand, enjoy, and get a benefit, and get emotions out of it. So yeah, so I guess this is my presentation, but real quick, I'm just going to show you real quick a video of one of the things that we did at the University of Texas. It was we did two things. We did a map of augmented reality, and then we did a tour. And as you can see here, and I'll just play it really quick, and I'll talk over it. The idea is that Vivo comes out at the University of Texas, and it gives you a tour of the UT campus. But we were trying to tell a story, and the story is that at some point something happens where the world goes black and white, and you have to restore the medals, right? The icon, the values of the University of Texas, right? So we did that, and then you can walk around Vivo and find these characters that are iconic to the University of Texas. And then one of the things I think is that this is cool and all, but we're still early on the technology, in my opinion, right? Like you see, like that squirrel, it's not on the right depth. There's some good tracking and all that, but anyways, it's cute. And I think, right now we experience this on the phone. Once Magic Leap or or I think Apple is coming with some AR glasses in the future or something, and then we can experience depth properly. Then I think this will be very interesting. It's very exciting to think about the opportunities that can create. Yeah, I'll just fast forward this really quick. There's also a map that comes with this, and you get to play with Vivo on the UT campus. This is geolocated, so it only works at UT.
I think we
but
we
anyways.
didn't see the share. Do you want to reshare it again?
Oh, you didn't see the video?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I wish.
No worries. Yeah.
So let me just play really quick then. I apologize. So let me just put it in the screen here. I'm gonna share screen. Okay, can you see now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just gonna do really quick, and then you just get the idea what I was talking about. So Vivo comes out.
Oh, hey there, partner.
And it's supposed to talk to you. It's gonna give you a tour.
Let's take a walk so I can show you this beautiful campus. I'll be your guide. Whoa, what's going on here? Everything's turned black and white. Looks like UT Austin has lost its spirit. We gotta fix this. Look around and we'll find out what happened. I think Ace is nearby. Let's go talk to him and figure out what's going on.
So you see the tracking is not perfect, and this was done using 8-wall,
A prank going on,
but from what I hear, Niantic, since they all got absorbed by Niantic, now they made this better. So it'll be interesting to see with better tracking, better depth positioning, and actually not just look at it in your phone, but in with actual augmented reality glasses. That can give you a good representation of depth and where things are. But you guys get the idea. And yeah.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and share your question. Thank you.
Well, one of the things that really stands out for me for this talk is you talk about stereoscopic 3D. We've had presenters here who had beautiful products with 3D in the name of their company. This is like the CEO and founder of the company. And I said, does your product support stereoscopic 3D? And he said, what's that? So it's really a breath of fresh air to see you talking about stereoscopic 3D.
Well, it's important, right? I mean, if we really want to make use of the leverage, make good use of immersion. It's like Oculus venues, right? Like the Foo Fighters concert. I don't know if you guys saw it, but it just feels like they just put like a flat screen in front of me, and I didn't feel immersed or anything. It just felt off. So yeah. I think Stereoscopic should play a big role in this.
Yeah, and there's a lot of differences between content preparation for stereoscopic 3D, like you described, versus the 2D stuff that we normally get. And like I go to a lot of photography talks and so forth, and people say, well, we have to follow the rule of 2/3. And I think, well, which eye are you talking about, the left eye or the right eye? Because you can do it in one, but not the other. And really the rule of 2/3 is for someone who has one eye.
Right.
There's a lot of interesting things. And I think it's, for me anyways, it is so much more interesting to see things in stereoscopic 3D. And so I think this is such a vital thing. So I think you're sort of, in a sense, fighting an uphill battle because so many people don't think anything about this at all. Another thing is, and I'm sure you've noticed this, these technologies come in waves, they come and go.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen the 3D waves come and go. We've seen the VR waves come and go. And I think what's important is you have to sort of get some momentum. You have to get some momentum when these waves start. Because if you don't get that momentum marketing wise and so forth, then the wave is just going to pass by. And so I think that's very important. And so I'm always looking to see whether we are really catching the wave and getting the momentum or not for this latest phase, that is the metaverse in this case. What do you think? What do you think? Are we catching the wave, or is it starting to slip away a little bit?
That's a good question, and you're right. It's like it comes and goes, right? Comes and goes. From what I've seen recently, I think we're just about to catch a wave, but I'm not sure if it'll stay though.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if it'll stay, and the reason is because from the conversations I had with people, from presentations I had with people, or I've seen, they just too much excitement, but I don't just need somebody tell me this is the greatest thing in the world, right? I need to see it.
right.
When I saw 3D when I was a student at an undergrad student, and I saw Coraline in 3D, and I saw that new wave of 3D, that was super exciting. So I was like, this is something I want to do. And then nothing happened for a while, and then then came Gravity, and then I saw you saw Gravity in 3D. I was like, okay, this is what it needs to be done. But then most of the other content was not very good. It was not very well thought. So it died, right?
Yeah.
3D televisions, great technology, not a lot of good content out there. And this is kind of like what I'm seeing right now, where we have great technology, great things that I was like, oh wow, somebody could just do something using these and do it right. I think this could stay, but I haven't seen it, and I may be wrong, right? Like I was describing Oculus venues, and I've gone there for just to see what it's all about. And you see all these avatars talking to each other and telling, oh, this is great and whatever. But I'm looking at it, it's like, well, no, it's not. It could be much better, right? And
Yeah.
they're not doing it. And I understand why they're not doing it, because they don't want to deal with stereoscopic, because it does present the challenges. Or there's this company here in Austin who does like training for baseball. And one of the things that I was suggesting was, hey, you should do this in stereoscopic because you're already having people put in some glasses. And they were like, oh, no, it's too hard for us. We don't want to, we're not going to do it. It's like, well, so I don't know. Back to your question, I think it's a wave. I hope I'm wrong. It may stay. But you're right. If we can take advantage of the wave and make it stay, then yeah, there's a lot of opportunity.
I know in the 3D club, what they're always complaining about is lack of venues, especially now, with the pandemic and theaters closing and so forth. And I told them at one of the meetings, there are like 120 million households in the United States, and 10 million, Facebook has sold 10 million Oculus Quest 2s. Now that's a venue.
Yeah, you know what? And actually, that's a venue. That's a venue. Yeah, so, and it's actually not that hard to build an app that can just take that and put a venue, right? So that's a project actually I've been wanting to do. I just haven't had the time for it. I built a small prototype. It looks terrible, looks pretty bad, but yes, you're right. That's a venue. And I don't know, I know Big Screen has kind of thought about it, but they have thought about it in a different way because there's no curation, right? No curation outside of the mainstream, right? Like, yeah. So, and there's a lot of good content out there that just nobody's gonna see. But yeah, so that will be something interesting. You're right, that's a venue. And if people can experience this content that the device by itself it's able to do, then I don't know, I think that could be a great thing.
If I could say something, in terms of the metaverse, it's still a niche market that is not getting its proper wave right now. But in terms of the VR immersive, have you heard of the Fantasy Dome getting built in Las Vegas?
No, I haven't.
Oh, just go ahead and do a quick Google up. It's pretty much like it says, like a dome, and it's built for all these HD level teleprompters. No way, sorry. Cameras that you can see 360 with, and they're really putting the theater version of what VR could be. And the where the people sit down and everything, if like say they're going through a breeze of a cold forest or anything, they actually throw in a breeze and everything. So a very immersive kind of way. So I was kind of thinking that it's still going to have to be at a location. Like if what were theaters before, it's going to be VR places theaters right now, and then maybe Metaverse will be in its own kind of way when people actually start. I want this kind of thing in my own home.
That looks pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I also forgot to mention is this whole idea of volumetric capture, right? But volumetric capture is expensive and it's hard. It needs a lot of computing powers. As a creator, you know, that's kind of determined that the technology of volumetric capture is not, it's not really there yet. That is super accessible. But yeah, I'm looking at this fantasy dome. This looks pretty cool.
Right. And like, okay, if it was in steps, like when theaters, people that motivated people to get surround sound and bigger screens at TV. So now they got the theater experience at home. Now with this VR experience, then they'll have home experiences adapted to that. And then the metaverse could actually get a footing to actually be as immersive as you wish it to be.
I think so. You know, and leverage the social thing, make the hardware better,
Mm-hmm.
better graphics, and yeah, and I think people will want to use it more.
Mm-hmm. I guess I have another question. How would one go about to maybe making a financial gain where the metaverse is right now? If I have like VR or XR technology on my hand right now, how would someone go about to making a financial gain out of that?
Well, I honestly, I mean, there's like talk, right? Personally, I haven't done it, so I'm not sure if I'll be qualified to tell you that, right? I can tell you this. I shot a 3D film a while ago, and you know, I got some sort of like distribution. But then I was like, well, it's a 3D film, so I want people to watch in 3D film, except like, you know, people are not going to, you know, where am I going to put it, right? Because I'm not like a big name or anything like that. So where am I going to put it and have people watch it in 3D? So then it occurred to me, what if I just make it into an app that, you know, that can be, people can access it if they have a headset. So I did that. I actually did it for the Oculus Go. And then I was like, well, you know, I have to think about the infrastructure behind it. So how are people going to access it? And I cannot just pack the video stream into the app. So actually people have to download it. So we have to do it on Amazon S3, whatever. Point is, it costs me, every time somebody downloads it, it costs me something. And I was like, well, I could do it. I never done this before, and we'll see what happens. But then it occurred to me, there's not a lot of experiences here, so I'm just gonna charge a little bit and see what happens. Partially was because I wanted to experiment with the Oculus payment system. That was really the main thing. And the thing is that I made about $300, which is not a lot, but for me not promoting it or anything, it's something. So I don't know exactly, you know, there's the whole idea of non-fungible tokens. I think there's a lot of hype. I think, like I was talking to Wes earlier on, I think that's gonna die pretty quick, because it's not sustainable. It's not actually grounded in anything that I'm like really interested. I think the way to go about it is do some content, good content that people want, release it so a lot of people can talk about it, give you some buzz, give you some good marketing, good word of mouth marketing, and then after that figure a way to like create a business model or monetize out of it. I'm sure, like, you know, there's other people who can give better advice with this. I'm not sure if I'm qualified to do it, but I can just tell you about my personal experience.
Okay.
I think there is a good use of NFTs, and it's not the way they're being used right now. Everything is on a speculative basis right now for those. But I've talked to a number of artists, and I'm an artist myself. And an NFT is, from a legal standpoint, it's a good way to bundle a set of rights for a work and sell that work as that bundle. So, for example, when you sell someone a painting or just let's say a framed print, they're just getting one copy of that framed print. But if you're talking to someone who's in the business of, producing content and so forth, if you can sell your entire copyright, for example, in that work, then that's a bundle that you're selling, a bundle of rights. And other than NFTs, there's really not an easy way to do that right now. There's not an easy way for someone to run around and browse the content that's available in terms of a bundle and buy it. But when you talk about NFTs, there's a way to do that. And one of the things we're seeing right now in this sort of speculative, frothy phase of NFTs is that a lot of these NFTs are landing in court because people were selling bundles of rights that they didn't own in these NFTs. So I think they'll be more useful in the future. And the speculative phase will sort of peter out.
Yeah, I that's the thing that, like, I was talking to my friend on Facebook, and it's like, well, once the content takes off and this, you have this idea about identity, and people start actually building a clear identity of who they are in this environment, and it becomes more popular, then this whole idea of ownership and owning digital property, then that seems to be a good business model, reliable, and B, a way to just, enhance your identity. You actually see it in cases such as Roblox, right? Where like, or people who are really into like role-playing games, that they just buy items, right? And we know it's just like models, what they're buying, but they buy them and they own them, and then they give them like credits or some sort of status or things like that. And it just has to do with like identity, right? So yeah, I like Jim says, like, I haven't, like, right now, I don't know about, like, I'm skeptical about it, but then, there may be some applicability to it coming up, or some value that that's not being exploited at the moment.
I think another interesting thing is you talked about immersive content and stereoscopic 3D. And my feeling is that, you really want stereoscopic 3D. And as you and I know, it's not something that you just all of a sudden do one day without any training, because there are a lot of pitfalls that you're going to run into. And it has to be done right in order to stop people from throwing up. So the question then becomes, how do we get this stereoscopic 3D incorporated significant amounts and significant numbers in like the metaverse? And it seems to me that you are in the perfect position for this, because people have to learn how to do it right. And it has to, somebody's got to make something so that someone puts on the headset and looks at it and says, wow, I didn't realize this could be done. And maybe through student projects that you would have, that would happen.
I think so. No, you're right, Jim. You're right, Jim. Like, if you look at Felix and Paul stuff, I mean, it's pretty good, and the stereoscopic is good. But then aside from that, then there's little gems here and there, right? But nothing, like, a lot of the content is just like, well, it's just not working, and then they realize it's not working, so they do it like monoscopic, and they're just missing an opportunity, I think.
I wonder also if there's a need for some search mechanism for this. because how do you find all these little golden nuggets that are out there? And
You have to, yeah.
if we could have some sort of, maybe that's another project, for your students or something. If we could have some sort of search mechanism that would allow us to find these wonderful little things that otherwise nobody would know about.
Absolutely. It's some sort of curation, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's one of the ideas I thought, and I've been wanting to build it. It's just, it needs time, it needs dedication, right? And just me by myself and then doing all these other things. Then I forget about it and kind of let it go and all that. But you're right. We have like within, right? Like I don't know, like if you go to within, there's some good stuff in there, but it's been like what? Last time I checked it out was like not 6 months ago, like 3 weeks ago. And the time before that was like 6 months ago. And it was the same content. It was the same thing. There was nothing really new. So yeah. So there needs to be, like you're saying, some sort of creation, but also some sort of curation.
Well, and this brings us perhaps back to something that Adam was asking about. We all know that there's money in search engines, right? As Wesley has talked about before, really the only search engines that exist right now are Google and Bing. Everything else is derived from those. And so in terms of traditional search engines, there's really no money in terms of venture capital because nobody wants to go up against them. But here's a new area. And maybe this is an area for search where you can make some money by showing these things that are really great that nobody knows about. And so maybe there's a way to monetize that. And maybe there are other areas in your university that would want to collaborate on something like that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that what you're describing is really exciting because right now there's a hype, there's a need. So yes, I mean, yeah, and definitely like everybody wants to collaborate. And then the challenge with what you just said, Jim, the only challenge that is with that is that my definition of the metaverse is somebody else's definition, right? So there's always misunderstandings, and that's when, if we could just understand each other better and come up with an agreement on what is it, what we could do or need to be done, then it probably will be easier to achieve that, right? Because right now it's like there's so many things, so many things going metaverse related, right? You have hardware creators, some sort of content creators, application creators, and then all the kind of industry, right? Health, education, and even just in education alone, right? Victory XR sees it different as, I don't know, some other company that also wants to get in the education business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And then we talk about design and all that stuff. So yeah, but with that, it's still pretty exciting because nobody's doing it, what you're just describing. It may be that, like we have search engine optimization today. It may be that perhaps there could be a standard set of keywords used for a search engine that covers this type of immersive media. And even though there's different approaches and so forth, that perhaps could be encoded in the keywords, and that would help your search engine out. Right. Here's the other scenario. It may change, but if you, at least from what I know, the most popular headset right now is the Oculus Quest, right? Which is owned by Meta. Right. If you want to build an application for the Oculus Quest, you have to go through the plugins from the SDKs that Meta provides. Right. Right. And with that, then that means that a search engine will have to be your own app that has your own ecosystem. But if you really want to get into the whole Meta ecosystem, then that may be a little bit more problematic because you're capped with what the manufacturer of this device can let you do, right? Yeah. To give an example, if you want to experience something on and this was a complaint from a lot of users, if you want to experience something on Oculus Quest, you have to have a Facebook account. Yeah. So that's another challenge, right? If you to do what you're describing, then do you make your own hardware? Do you partner with somebody else? How do you get that hump? Or maybe that's a separate keyword in your search engine.
You know, this is for Oculus Quest. This works with a broader range of devices and so forth. So
Right. Or
I
you,
go
yeah,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead. I was just gonna say, or you just in your own app, you just make your own curation, right? And
Yes.
get and do the legwork to actually bring out all this content that could live within your own ecosystem, right? With your own
Yeah.
infrastructure and all that.
Yeah. It just leaves more exciting things for you to do in your new job.
Yeah, yeah. Just doing these talks and talking to people like you, Jim, it makes me excited.
Actually, if I may add, on the definition of metaverse, maybe we can just stick to the simplest one that I found, which is that the metaverse we just define as the virtual reality plus avatars. But that I think some other people are overthinking it. Some guy just wrote a book recently on his idea of the metaverse. It's like several hundred pages, and I haven't bought it yet because I don't want to buy it. But the simplest thing is, okay, if you just say VR, most people have a pretty good idea of what that is, and there's a lot of work done on it. And then you say avatar. You just add those things together. You just keep it as simple as possible, because if you follow the definition of how if you look at the history of how the web grew, like from 1989, it was the simplest thing that would work on a common set of hardware. So we wouldn't get stuck. We wouldn't get trapped in like an Oculus desert or something like that. So anyway. Yeah.
That's a good point, because then just take it by steps, right? Instead
Yeah.
of just being overwhelmed, this, and that. It's just one step, do it right, and then maybe that leads to something beyond that.
Yeah, because maybe right now, if here's the analogy with the history of the web. The web was born 1989 in Europe, but right now it's just around, it's as though we are in 1989 or maybe it's 1988, somewhere around there, where there's no standardization, there's no common HTML agreed amongst the major players. Every player, in fact, if you go before the web, there was once with all the personal computers in the mid 80s, when each PC manufacturer would make its own operating system that they had to. Yeah, and this is basically like when Facebook's doing its Oculus thing, it's rolling its own OS because it has no other choice.
Right, right. But as a creator, right? To me as a creator, how do so I have to build something on top of that OS, and then I have to be bound by the rules of Meta, right? So, and then if I want to do the same thing for, say, like Vive, then I have to kind of report that into Steam or et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, so for like a big corporation that has money to do it, well, they'll do it. But for an individual like myself, where it's like, well, I do it on Oculus, and that's a big, and that's a big step, and that's a big accomplishment.
Which is why, you see, okay, a big corporation. If you think of somebody like Facebook, they are large enough that they could support obviously Oculus, their own hardware system, but they could support a port, some kind of simple port to like the Roblox, for example, and all the other ones. Facebook could afford that, like just some simple little thing so that we standardize, and Facebook would voluntarily give up some market share because when it supports some other their opponent's hardware, but they could build a bigger software system on top of it. And it's sort of in a way, Facebook itself arose just like Google, because they, if you look at the people who laid all this optical fiber, who spent billions of dollars in the US to lay the fiber between the American cities, they were commoditized because on top of that, Google and Facebook would run their software, the search engines and the Facebook social thing, and that's all like pure software at that point, and they got the most profit.
Right. So
Anyway.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, they'll make Facebook, they'll make their money, right? But even Facebook right now, they're struggling for a lot of reasons. But they're still struggling because they haven't really realized what this can do, and they actually done some pretty interesting stuff here and there. But there's no like a lot of, you think about like television. Television is doing really well right now because there's a lot of competitors. There's also a lot of shows that people want to watch. And also the pandemic also helped, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But good talk. Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Going
what
back
happened
to
to me? Oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. My bad.
okay. Going back to the VR and your storytelling concept. You really want to get away from like where the only business there is video games. In terms of story, you want it to be interactive, like you could actually clench items and such like that. Do you want something with gloves kind of thing, or do you still want it with controllers and also a controlled environment like a room?
Well, that depends on a couple of things. That depends on the creator, right? Doing it, because for some people, their story, they may not want to do all that, so they may just want you to experience something. It also depends on what the story is about, right? So, like, for example, if you have, like, for example, if I can think one of the stories that I would like to tell, right? Like, if I'm like sending, like, like, have a character that has to go to the underworld and meet with the Green Reaper, for example, then and for the most part, I would like them to experience the story, get empathizing with the characters. But then on the moment where the main character maybe goes to the underworld, maybe like have all these strange visuals that also will benefit from haptics, right? And the sound, it starts going like a little bit interesting or in different spaces, right? So you, as an audience member, you kind of get a feeling of like, oh, what according to Simon, it feels going to the underworld. And if I see in this television, will be maybe cool, but in here, I not only see it in 3 dimensions, but actually I feel it because of haptics. And there was this technology also in Augmented Reality World Expo a couple of weeks ago, where you can sense smell, right? Maybe that's another storytelling tool, and this is what it smells like. And according to Simon Quiroz, based on how we do it. So it really depends. I wouldn't say there is like a straight set of rules, because I don't think anybody knows what those straight set of rules are. I think you should experiment, but within that experimentation, understand what the technology can do, so you can use that technology to service your story the best way that you, as a creator, see fit.
Oh,
Does that
God.
answer your question, or no?
Yeah, that answered my question.
Simon,
Yeah.
one thing I wanted to mention is I live about 15 minutes from where you're about to work. And you had talked about trying to figure out where you're going to live in the area and so forth. If you wanted to bounce off anything from me about, the different communities around here and so forth, I'd be happy to answer any
Oh,
questions.
that'd be great, Jim. I very much appreciate it. Are you on LinkedIn?
No, actually, I'm not. I've never needed it, so I haven't set it up. And I've got a little bit of a conjunctivitis right now, so I'm having a hard time with the screen. But what I can do is I can try to send you in the chat. I'm having trouble getting the chat to work right now.
Well, actually, I think I can just email you directly. I'm just gonna give you my email.
Okay.
Thank you, Jim. I very much appreciate it.
Sure,
Yeah,
I'll send you. It doesn't look like we can save the chat right now. Okay, let's see. I've got this sort of large screen. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll shoot you an email, and I'm not doing in-person stuff right now, but we could talk.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It'll be great to catch up to you and see who else we know as well.
Yeah.
And Simon, when you come over here, would you be looking for modelers, animators, and someone, Unity, Unreal, Maya kind of thing?
Probably, yeah. I mean, that's always, that's very, very beneficial, right? And that's a really great skill to have. So likely, if I can get a project off the ground, yeah.
Okay, because I'm a modeler and an animator. So,
Okay.
yeah.
That's great. So yes, please hit me up because, you know, like if there's another, like, I don't know how to model myself.
Mhm.
I mean, I have the main basics of the software of Cinema 4D and Maya and all that stuff, but I really don't have the talent to model. So if there's another project, like another, like I get talks about like doing another tour of other campuses with the augmented reality thing, we always need models, and the models need to be like low polygon and all stuff, but that'd be
Right.
great. So you could send me your info. Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think you're muted, Dominic. Or, oh, there you are. Oh wait. I think your sound went away again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's why before I was trying to chime in a couple of times, but I think maybe it's just I am muted. Yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you so much for Simon's wonderful and amazing talk, and we all learn a lot from you. And yeah, like when will you be in California?
I'm looking probably like first week of August.
Wow, that's yeah,
Really soon, right? Yeah.
pretty soon. Wow, very
Yeah.
soon. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, California is definitely, I mean, beach life and sunshine. Yeah, and yeah, I would say pretty hot all the time. So yeah. So yeah, welcome and yeah, thank you so much. Any other last minute questions? No. Okay. So thank you,
Well, thank you
Simon.
for having me here. I appreciate
Yeah.
you, and
Yeah, and I will
meet all of
follow
you
up.
guys.
Yeah.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.